Hello, Caroline here from Spirit of Nature Art and a new video tutorial. This one is a project I have been wanting to do for a while now. This is going to be a tunnel book. And as you can see, I've already been busy doing some fussy cutting to get some of the kind of main images that are going to form how this tunnel is going to get created. So I've been doing that over the last week or so, but for now we're going to kind of put all of those to the side. And we are going to focus on creating the tunnel in the book first, and then we'll come back to using all those fussy cut pieces. So I've chosen a book here that's got really good solid construction, there's no damage, the pages are all nicely bound in, the spine is safe and secure, and that's exactly what we want to use for a tunnel book. I have cut out this piece of card to give me a template to draw around to create that initial kind of entry into our tunnel. So I am just putting my cutting mat immediately behind the cover of the book, and I am going to use my scalpel and my steel rule. And the trick here is just to go slow. I'm doing lots of small, steady kind of cuts rather than trying to get through it in one go. I think I went through, I definitely used one scalpel blade just to get this cover piece out. So be prepared. This took me quite a while. I'm not going to make you sit and watch me do it. I reckon I probably would have passed the scalpel over each of those lines a good kind of 20 times, and then obviously having to go into the corners just to really get those kind of neat and tidy. So I'm just drawing through that to create the template again. I'm changing my scalpel blade before I get started, and I'm going to divide the depth of the book by 5, and that's just what I think is going to work for this particular project. It gives each kind of section enough depth to work with, but also I don't want to be creating so many kind of cuts that I've got to kind of keep going forever. So I'm going to use the same size that I used on the cover for the first section of the book. So I've literally just got my pencil and drawn through the hole we've created on the cover. And again, lots of passes. And I've maybe taken like 10 pages at a time to cut through. And again, I went through about 5 or 6 scalpels doing this because that's a whole book that we want to cut the pages out. So yeah, choosing about 10 pages at a time, putting those to the side, might use those somewhere else, and then taking the next 10 pages, putting my cutting mat behind it, using because we're still on that first section of the tunnel, I'm still using that original cut as my template. And just to be sure, I'm drawing around it again with my ruler. What I'm doing as well when I'm doing this is I'm allowing the lines that I'm using the ruler on to go a little bit further, so it makes it easier for me to see where to cut. Because if I put my ruler there, then I can't see where the end of the line is. And this is the first time I've done this, so I'm kind of learning as I'm going. So I've kind of realised that those pages are getting in my way. So I'm just kind of clipping them out of the way and going in and cutting the next 10 pages. And I've got this piece here that I cut out of one of my books that I want to use as the very back of the tunnel. These little kind of rabbits running away into the distance. And so I'm starting to think about the size of the other kind of sections of this tunnel book now. So I wanted to base it on the very back of the tunnel first of all. So I've just created this little grid. These are 1 centimetre squares that I have created that is on that same piece that we used to cut out the front page. And that's the size that I know I want the very last section of my tunnel to be, so that we can use this picture here of the bunnies running away with their footprints as the very back of the tunnel. And now I can look at these little kind of sections here and figure out what size I want the other templates to be. So I'm literally just using 1 centimetre increments, and that goes with the 5 sections that I have roughly divided the book into. And that is a very rough, as you saw me, I literally just put my pencil against it, my ruler against it, and roughly divided that by 5. So now I'm going to use each of these templates to cut out the next section. So clipping that first section up and out the way. But I'm also going to lean it against my rather handy coffee mug there, because if that cover falls all the way back flat, what will happen is those pages start to move and they won't be lined up. So I'm just leaning that against my coffee mug so that these pages stay in the same spot. And drawing around my next template, which is going to be 1 centimetre smaller than the original first cutting, so that we can start to see the tunnel being created. So again, taking about 10 pages or so, putting my cutting mat underneath, and then going in with my scalpel. And again, slow and steady, turning the book around so that you're always cutting towards yourself, and just taking your time. And actually, the smaller amount of pages you go through, the easier it is. I'm not very patient, so I tended to choose too many pages and then have to go in and do some more cuts as the pages were coming out. But this is something to do with an audio book on in the background, and just take your time. And going back in and just, I never quite go all the way into the corners. So just going back in and connecting those 2 cuts so that those corners are nice and neat and tidy. Here we go. So I chose too many pages here, so this last one hasn't quite wanted to disconnect. There we go. So we can now start to see the second section. And I only really need to use that cardboard template once, because now I've cut that first section out, I can just draw through that using my pencil. Rubbing out those pencil lines on the very first page of each section, because those ones will be visible, although by the time we've added all the fussy cuts in, you're not going to see very much. But clipping those up, out of the way, leaning it against my coffee mug. And there we go, we can see that next section now has been cut out. And just repeat, using all of those templates, cutting around 1/5 of the book each time on the next template so that we get this tunnel effect. And that's just a nail file that I'm using just to tidy up the edges of that front cover there. Just snipping out any little bits that might not have been cut out so smoothly with the scalpel. And now I'm coming in with some Distress ink. I'm using Distress Oxide, sorry, and I'm using Vintage Photo. So I just want to take away that kind of harsh, kind of like white line where I've cut, and also just start to add a little bit of kind of definition to each of these sections here. So you can really see these sections that I've cut out now. And actually, as we add the ink, that's going to help each individual section really pop. So you'll see that much more clearly by the time we have inked up each of those. And I'm not trying to be, kind of particularly accurate with this. I just want to get each section having some on it. As you can see, you can really now see those different layers in that tunnel book. And I love that effect that you get on old books and manuscripts where there's a little bit of gold on the edges of the leaves, pages. So I've just got my Sizzix Lustre Wax here, and I'm just dabbing that around. I'm specifically wanting to get that onto the cover when I'm doing that, but I'm also now going in and adding that Lustre Wax to the inside of those pages, just like I did with the Distress Oxide, just to get that slight little shimmer on that, so that as you move the book and look into the tunnel, you'll see just those little tiny bits of shimmer. just like you see on the edges of those old books. So here we go. There is the tunnel created. Lots of cutting. It's simple, but very fiddly, so take your time. And this was the idea that I had. I wanted to put those little bunnies in the back. And now it's time to start to create the beautiful tunnel effect. So I have been busy fussy cutting these images out of some of my nature books. And actually one of the most common questions I get are, where do I get my books and what books do I use? So at the very end of this video, I will put a photograph of the books, the books that I used mostly for this project. But basically I just go around the charity shops and pick up any kind of like illustrated nature books. Usually they're only a couple of pounds, and I use those to cut my images from. They're usually books from like the kind of, 70s, 80s and stuff, so they're not kind of, vintage, so you can pick them up pretty cheap, but the illustrations in them are lovely. So I'm starting to build the image that I want to create here. So I'm using the kind of more focal images first of all, so the animals, the main structure. And leaving the kind of leaves and foliage until a bit later to fill the gaps in, but just starting to think about creating that sense of depth. So using the bigger images at the front and going into the smaller images towards the back. I love how the tree kind of frames that top corner. So I was keen to get something like that in, but the main kind of inspiration I had for the book was those bunnies running off into the distance and that deer at the front. And I love that little mouse at the bottom there. I'm not sure about the big bird at the front. I think it's too big. So I'm just playing around at the moment. And what I'm doing with these main images is I am kind of putting them in on the first page of each section of the tunnel. And when I go in then to add in more of the detail, I will start to use the full depth of each tunnel section. So I won't just attach to that front page. I will be sliding the little individual pieces into those pages on the whole kind of depth of each tunnel. I've got some digitals here as well. These are the Holtz Currator Stamp set that I use to create my own little snippets. So just using some of these little details here because I want to cover up that dressmaking thing at the top. Didn't want that to be in my little forest tunnel enchanted space. So I'm just starting to build the layers here. So I'm not sticking anything in immediately. I'm playing around with the composition, filling in the gaps, adding in some of those little snippeties and the digitals just to create a little bit of interest and contrast. And as you can see, I am inking everything with the vintage photo. And when I'm happy, using a little bit of glue stick. I don't want to use a wet glue for this, so using glue stick just to put everything in the place that I want it to be in. And then just doing one little section at a time. At the moment, as I said, I'm just trying to get the key features in, because then I can go back and start to fill in the gaps and build up that lovely tunnel effect. So always thinking about, so these leaves here, really using the bigger ones at the front. You'll see when we get to the finer details towards the end, I'm literally cutting out teeny tiny individual leaves and putting those in between some of those pages on each tunnel, just to create that real kind of sense of depth. And that's it. Repeat. I did this over the course of a few days, so I would get to a certain point and step away and leave it, and then come back and look at it completely fresh and start to add some more detail in. And there's always that question of when is enough enough? And you just have to decide that. When I showed this to hubby after day one, he was like, wow, that's amazing, that's brilliant, have you finished? And I was like, no, I still want to do some more. And he was like, really? And then when he came back and looked at how it looked at the end of day two, he was like, oh wow, yeah, actually that I didn't think you could fit any more in, but actually you can, and it makes a huge difference. I'm also just trying to cover up some of those areas where there's text that I want to still see some of the features of the book, but I also want to add in some extra kind of details as well. So I think some of these I've got that little pot there is a whole load of different things. Some of it will be Tim Holtz ephemera, some of it will be digitals, maybe Tracie Fox digitals. Yeah, I changed that big bird for a slightly smaller one. It was just too big, but I do end up using it on the cover. So I think now what I'm just going to do is put some music on and just let you watch. I've fast forwarded it a lot. Obviously I'm not doing it this quickly, and I've cut out, you know, a load, because this was hours and hours of me cutting and inking and sticking, and you get the idea. But you'll start to see how this builds. You start to see now that I start to use some of the foliage. And how that tunnel effect really starts to kick in. So it has been a long while since I have done a video tutorial. I know I've had lots of lovely, kind messages from people. We very sadly lost our beautiful cat Roscoe, who has featured in many of these videos. You guys know he was my art buddy. He would come and sit and patiently watch me do things like this. He would be sitting just out of camera view and sometimes in camera view. It was a big shock to us, and it really kind of rocked the whole family, me, hubby, and the other cats as well. So it's taken us a little while to get back to our balance and feeling like we can pick back up. And actually, do you know what? I haven't picked back up any of the projects I was working on at the time it happened. I ditched all of them. I deleted all the videos that I was working on. I just couldn't pick back up on those things. So it kind of hit us a lot harder than we were expecting. So thank you for your patience and waiting for me to feel ready to do videos. Obviously, I have still been at my art desk pretty much every single day, because that's part of me and life and how I cope. But it's interesting how grief impacts you in terms of the things that you kind of feel you can't do. Being able to kind of record videos and edit and voiceover just did not feel like it was something I was able to do. So it feels nice now to be back doing this, and this was definitely, I had in my mind, this was always going to be the project that was going to be the one that I would use as the project to kind of start doing my videos again. So thank you for your patience, and thank you for all the beautiful comments. And who knows, there may be another little cat that comes to join me at my art desk at some point soon. So I'm really happy now with the level of detail that I've got in there. You can see how many layers start to kind of create that tunnel. We're not just using those 5 sections that we've cut out, we're using all the individual pages in between. And I want to really kind of bring the cover into that tunnel as well. So it didn't feel quite so, here's the cover. So just blending that cover in by using some of those details. So you can see I did use that big bird, but I used it down the bottom there. So I used quite a lot of big elements in that bottom area just to kind of ground that book. But I also wanted to balance that out with a few more details at the top. So I did poke a couple of holes through the top of that cover so I could put some brads through that little metal nameplate. And just a few details at the top there. Oh, and this was a little wax seal that I made just to add that little, again, a detail at the bottom to balance that out. I've used some high-tack glue there just to stick the front cover to the first page. And I'm just snipping off all the little bits that were hanging out, and distress inked all the way around the outside, also luster waxed. And then this is matte medium gel, and I'm just squeezing the book as tightly closed as I can. And I actually put 3 layers of this on. I do 1 layer, put a heavy book on the top, allow it to dry, come back, do another layer, heavy book on the top, allow it to dry. I did 3 layers of that just to set the whole book together like it's one solid brick. And I did put a little bit of extra luster wax on after that final layer of the matte medium as well. So here we have it, the final piece. I am so pleased with this. I loved doing it. Very fiddly. So it's a job to do when you've got peace and quiet and you're feeling like you have enough patience. But isn't the effect amazing? I love this. Reminds me of a book I had when I was a little girl. I would spend hours just looking at the different layers. And I love how that little wax seal came out. I think that really just adds an extra little element to the book. So there we go. I hope it's something you give a go. It's definitely something you need the patience for. Like I say, it's a simple thing to do, but very fiddly. So you can see how teeny tiny some of those leaves are that I cut out. But definitely well worth the effect. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoy giving it a go yourself. And I shall look forward to seeing you for another video tutorial very soon.